Hey y'all, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to create this cute little Santa sign. So to start off, I have a piece of scrap wood. It is 7 inches wide and about 15.5 inches tall. This is a piece of pine wood and it's stained in dark walnut by Minwax. Now for the first paint we're going to use, I'm using this Crimson by Waverly Chalk Paint. And the paintbrushes I'm using are from Walmart. This is the pack that they came in. The one that I'm using now is a 3/4 of an inch paintbrush. So we're going to start off by just painting Santa's body. So I'm just doing kind of like a little slope off the side of the board. I'm just starting off kind of small and then working my way out. This just helps allow room for error so that we don't make him too big, because I want him kind of like peering off the side of the board a little bit, kind of like he's peeking over at us. And I just want to add in a little bit of texture to his coat. So I'm just adding in a tiny little bit of black and just mixing that into my red. And you can just continue to work at this until you get the shape that you want for Santa's body. And now we're going to move on to painting his beard. So I'm using Waverly Chalk Paint Snow White. And we're just going to start right at the top of his body. And you're just going to try to visualize how you want his beard to appear. So I'm going to do mine kind of in a shape of an upside down triangle. But of course in just a more rounded shape and kind of going off the side of the board. And the top portion of his beard doesn't have to be perfect at this part, because we are going to cover most of that with his mustache. And we're just going to fill that completely in. I do use my blow dryer to try to speed up this drying process a little bit, and we're going to go in for a second coat. Now this second coat, I am a lot heavier with it because I do want it to be kind of chunky and give it kind of a textured look, which is fairly easy to achieve with chalk paint because it is such a thick paint. And sometimes it'll even dry with a little bit of a cracked look, which is totally fine with me because I want it to have more of a rustic and textured look. Now, of course, if you don't want to do the textured look like this, you can just do it completely smooth. Now we're going to move on to painting Santa's face. So I'm mixing together my crimson and my white paint to kind of create this soft pink color. I'm mixing in a little bit of orange just to give him a little more of a peach color. And I don't measure this in any way. I just kind of keep adding to it until I achieve the color that I want. And I'm using the number 4 paintbrush for this, but you can use any type of little small paintbrush that you have. And so now we're just creating Santa's face. So he does look a little bald right now, but we're just going to do a little rounded shape for his head. It doesn't have to be perfect. All of this is going to be covered up with his hat and his mustache anyway. You just want to make it wide enough so that you can fit his mustache and his nose and everything on it. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you do end up making it a little bit too big, you can always cover it more with the hat or with his mustache. And now I'm going back to the original paintbrush, which is 3/4 of an inch, and I've loaded that paintbrush up kind of heavy so that I could achieve a cleaner line for the top parts of his mustache. And we're just creating 2 little waves on his face as his mustache. Now in hindsight, I would have rather have had his mustache be a little more pointy and like tilted up a little more on the end, just to make it look like he's smiling a little bit more. So you can add that at this part if you want to. And again, I do want this to have a textured look, so I'm super heavy with my paint and just kind of dragging that along so that it has a little bit of a textured look on his mustache. And now we're going to add the fuzzy part of his hat that goes around his face. So I'm super heavy with my paint again, and we're just going to try to make it a little fluffy. I'm kind of coming down a little bit on his face because I don't want his face that big. This is where you can kind of visualize where his nose is going to be and where his little eyes are going to go, so that you can bring his hat down to where you want it so that his face isn't too big and where it's placed just right. Now I didn't want to have to bother with painting Santa's hair, so his hat wraps all the way around his face and it's going all the way on the other side of the board as well. So it's just a little tiny little bit of his face showing. Now I'm using another small paintbrush and going back with the crimson, and we're going to paint the top portion of his hat. And I am trying to be careful not to get any red paint on the white fluffy part of his hat, but it's not a big deal if you do get some on there. I think I do end up getting some on mine as well. We are going to go back and add a second layer for that top portion of his hat anyway, so we can always just cover that up. But I am trying to create kind of like a slanted triangle for the top portion of his hat. We do want it to look kind of relaxed, like it is just kind of hanging over a little bit. And I'm doing the same thing that I did for his coat, just mixing in a tiny little bit of black so that we add a little texture, a little shading to it so that it looks a little more three-dimensional. And then just painting that little piece that hangs over on the top portion of his hat, so that way it actually looks like it's hanging over the rest of his hat as it naturally would. And then just blending the very top. And now we're going to move on to painting his nose. So I'm mixing in the red and white a little bit darker for his nose. And this is where you can make the paintbrush work for you. So if you have that squared off smaller paintbrush, you just start in the middle and just do a little spin with it to create a perfect little circle. And now we're going to add our second coat for the fluffy part of his hat. So I'm just going right back over that edge and just kind of bumping it up a little bit to give it a little more of a fuzzy look. And again, just trying to create that textured look. So I'm just heavy with my paint on that as well. Now we can draw his cute little eyes, so I'm using this black paint pen and I'm just drawing a tiny little eye on each side of his nose. I did keep them kind of close together and also kept them small just because I thought it looked cuter. Now for the little ball on the end of his hat, I'm using these little fluffy snowballs from Dollar Tree. At this point, I thought it would be really cute to give this more of a three-dimensional look and add in some real pieces just to give it a little mix of painting and crafting. And I'm just stealing these little pieces of greenery off of this wreath that I had, and we're just going to glue those directly onto the board because I plan on creating a little tiny Christmas tree beside our Santa Claus. And I have been incorporating this a lot with my crafts lately, but I just think it's so cute. I'm a little obsessed with adding little trees on the sides of my crafts. And of course we have to add a little star to our tree, so I have this little pack of Rusty stars that I got off Amazon. And apparently I wasn't recording when I made the little container for our tree down the bottom, but I just used a piece of burlap for that. And I thought it'd be really cute to add this little peppermint twine on it just to give it a little more color. One of my sweet followers on Facebook sent me these cute little red bells, so I added those to the tree as well, so our sign does a little jingle. I made a little snowman sign similar to this that I'll share over in the corner for you guys if you missed it. Now this step is optional, but I am using some watered down nutmeg and also some watered down black just to create a little bit of shading around Santa's beard to give it a little more of a three-dimensional look. Now my black was a little bit heavier, so I just used my finger just to rub that along and smear it in a little more. But as you can see, it creates a nice little shaded look right along his beard. And we can't paint Santa without doing some little red cheeks for him, so I'm just dabbing in a little bit of dark pink right along his mustache, and I'm just kind of dry brushing that on. Now I do have to go back and touch up his mustache a little bit. In hindsight, it would be easier to do this before you do the mustache, but you can always just touch it up and add little minor details like this as you go. And I also wanted to add a little sparkle to his eyes, so I'm just using my white paint pen for that. So this is how he turned out in the end. I think it turned out so cute. I love his little face and I love the little tree beside him. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video and are able to create one yourself. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.